Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. SteadyMD lets you maintain a meaningful, long-lasting relationship with a primary care physician who you can meet with anytime over phone or video chat. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. Visit steadymd.com/Pakman to get started. It's important for us to be realists and not idealists. We have to be cautiously optimistic and pragmatic, not delusionally utopian. And in that vein, it's important that we all understand as we think about the next months and certainly the next couple of years, that there is simply not going to be the unity that Joe Biden campaigned on and called for in his inauguration speech. We've talked about this a little bit more, and later today we're going to be looking at one piece of why, which is that thanks to the cult of Trump, there are now people in positions of power like Lauren Boebert, like Madison Cawthorn, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who don't know anything. They are simply political characters playing roles. They are not lawmakers. They are not thinkers, and unity isn't part of the character they've been hired to play. And by hired, I mean voted in by wacky Trumpy Republicans in November of 2020. That's one side. But there's another side to this, which is that Joe Biden is going to do things that will disgust not half of the country, but a large enough portion of it that a contingent of Republican elected officials will stand in the way and say no, no matter what. We actually are seeing, amazingly, significant approval of, for example, Joe Biden's first week 5 days on COVID. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But even significant approval, like 70%, which in this country is incredible. It's almost unanimous approval for the standards we have here. The 30% that hates it are represented by some of the most radical members of Congress. And so there is not going to be unity. Conservative Rich Lowry wrote a piece in Politico called "No, There Won't Be Unity." And his subheadline explains his take on why, which is, quote, "On substance, Biden is not going to pursue a consensus bipartisan agenda, but a progressive one." I don't know that I'd characterize Biden's agenda as progressive. It's certainly to the left of recent Democratic presidents. But what Rich Lowry is saying is that Joe Biden is going to do things that the right will never accept. Joe Biden wants unity around us deciding as a country to follow science instead of cartoonish denialism on COVID. 30 or so percent of the country doesn't want that. This isn't a both sides thing, merely differences of opinion. Imagine if 30% of the country said, we don't agree with the laws of gravity. You'd say, okay, well, you're going to end up getting a lot of bumps on the head and people falling out of buildings. But the idea of ignoring something that simply is, you don't really have a choice. And Joe Biden is going with reality on COVID. And about 30% of the country doesn't accept it. So you're not going to get unity. Joe Biden is doing things that are going to be characterized as stirring the pot. Literally the term Rich Lowry uses in the Politico piece. Last week, I played a clip for you from Fox News of anchor Ainsley Earhart saying Joe Biden called for unity, and yet he did executive orders that go against how Trump governed. Well, that's a framework where unity is quite literally impossible. Now, unity doesn't have to be we agree with Joe Biden on everything. Unity should be Biden won. Yes, he really did win. Many of them don't accept that. But OK, but Biden won. Unity can be, since Biden won, let's try it. Let's not actively obstruct everything Joe Biden tries to do. And let's evaluate where we are in 6 months empirically. But they're not going to do that. And so what Republicans are already saying, there won't be unity because Joe Biden is doing stuff. They are right about half of it, which is there won't be unity. But it's more because of the country being divided culturally to such a degree. One side wants to get actual experts and scientists involved in solving some of the biggest challenges we have. The other side wants cartoon character right wingers who want to bring guns on the House floor and feed every false conspiratorial notion they can come up with. Unity truly isn't possible in that scenario, but it isn't because Joe Biden is doing things. Biden's president. That's what presidents do when they get to work. When they don't go golfing 20% of the time, they get to work and they try to do the things they campaigned on. But that's not the story being told on right-wing media, which is another reason why there won't be unity. I'm not challenging Fox News's right to exist. I'm not saying Newsmax should be pulled off the air. I'm pointing out that they foment the lack of unity by putting out nonsense like Biden doing the things he promised to do is divisive. Joe Biden doing the things he ran on doing, which got him elected, is now being called a divisive action. And understand that with that as your starting point, the possibility of unity doesn't exist because you're not dealing in actually evaluating policy. You're not dealing in saying, oh, Joe Biden did this. Let's see what the results are. You're engaging in hyperbole and non-thinking reactivity. And so Rich Lowry is right. There's not going to be unity, but not because Joe Biden is some extreme progressive left winger. It's because 30% of this country simply refuses to accept reality. And they have enough support among the House and Senate that there will be actual elected official Republicans who will do what they can to get in the way of anything Joe Biden wants to do. And anything Joe Biden gets done, they will say it's bad a priori and Joe Biden should be punished because he's doing something different than what Republicans want him to do. It's looking very ugly. The good news is it seems that Democrats understand this and Bernie Sanders understands this. And they are ready to simply pass things by simple majority, ignoring Republicans. Let's talk about that next. There's a very interesting Axios report that shows our friend Bernie Sanders understands they can't count on Republicans for a damn thing, and that he plans to push COVID relief and maybe more through the Senate with a simple majority. He was on CNN State of the Union yesterday talking about this, and he said they'll see about other issues. With the COVID relief package proposed by Joe Biden, which will top up the $600 payments to $2,000 with an additional $1,400 and expand unemployment benefits and do a lot of other things. Bernie Sanders says it will be a simple majority vote in the Senate to get it through. Why is this so important? This process known as budget reconciliation allows Democrats to skip or circumvent the 60 vote requirement that exists in the Senate for many, many legislative attempts for many bills. And if Democrats are able to use budget reconciliation to rather than need 60 votes in the Senate, which means you've got to find 10 Republican votes, 50 with Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote would be enough to get benefits to unemployed Americans. To bolster unemployment benefits, to get that additional $1,400 payment. And what Bernie Sanders is saying is really clear, really pragmatic. And I love to see him saying this. Bernie says, quote, what we cannot do is wait weeks and weeks and months to go forward. We have to act now. We're going to use reconciliation. That's 50 votes in the Senate plus the vice president to pass this legislation. And when he was asked if he wants a relief bill passed before Trump's impeachment trial begins in just a couple of weeks, he said, we've got to do everything. This is not, you don't have time to sit around weeks on impeachment and not get vaccines into the arms of people, referring, of course, to the additional vaccine funding in the coronavirus stimulus. I think that this is absolutely the right thing to do. You don't have to. I mean, listen, we're going to be having the conversation about the filibuster soon on the show, and I've been reading a lot about it. Many of you have been saying, talk about getting rid of the filibuster or not. Aside from that, not only may Democrats have to do this, Democrats will have to do this on a number of issues over the next couple of years. They have until the 2022 midterms to show what it means to have a Democratic majority and what can be done with it. If they waste it by letting the Republican Party poison the well on everything they want to do and obstruct the way we know Republicans are planning to do, it will actually make the case for giving Democrats more seats in 22 very difficult to make. Wait a second. You had the House, Senate, and White House, and you didn't get anything done. Well, We needed 60. Well, but you could have used budget reconciliation to get it done with a simple majority. Right. But no, these are unique times coming off of arguably the worst presidency in modern American history during a mishandled global 100-year pandemic with an economic layer on top of the medical layer. If there is ever a time to say, guys, you Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts, Ted Cruz, and all these guys who are still raising money from these wacko cultist Trumpists, we just can't even deal with you guys. We're going to get things done on our own. And that's how ultimately Democrats will have to justify re-election in November of 2022. This is the idea of getting rid of the filibuster. This is why Mitch McConnell is fighting it, because they want to do anything they can to prevent Democrats from being able to pass things with a simple majority. Budget reconciliation is a way that they could do COVID relief without getting 60 votes. Now, on the filibuster, there are arguments on both sides. If I'm sort of previewing my most recent thought, I'm leaning towards being supportive of getting rid of the filibuster. That's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about passing COVID relief quickly. I'm talking in the next 10 to 14 days without a 60 vote majority using budget reconciliation. Now, it's important to remember budgets can't be filibustered. Anything that is allocations of money or lack thereof can be passed without 0 Republican votes. There are other things where, as of right now, Republicans can filibuster. If Democrats decide we're going to do this with a simple majority, Republicans can't stop them. I believe this is the right decision. I'm glad to see Bernie in this position, and I want to hear from you. Where do you think this is going to lead during the next 2 years? Find me on Twitter at @DPakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If you are anything like me, you probably aren't thrilled with the idea of going into a doctor's office right now. And thankfully, there's a practical and affordable way to take control of your health and get personalized care from the comfort of your home. It's a service called SteadyMD. They're one of our sponsors. You take a quiz, you get matched with a licensed primary care physician who understands your health needs. You have a 1-hour video call with your new doctor. You establish a meaningful relationship with them. And after that, your doctor is available to you anytime by text, phone, or video chat. This is not a random doctor on call. Each doctor at SteadyMD has a limited number of patients, so they actually have time to listen to you. You get the personal attention that you deserve. They can do almost everything an in-person doctor can do: perform medical evaluations, talk to you about health concerns, send prescriptions to your home or local pharmacy, and anything they can't do online, they'll quickly set you up with an in-person provider to do, things like blood tests, as an example. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. I took their quiz. They matched me with a doctor who specializes in my particular health needs and situation. The doctor they gave me is a really perfect fit for me and my medical needs. They have a special offer only for my audience. You'll get 50% off your first month, but only until January 31st. So make sure to sign up soon. Click the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Remember that this program is primarily funded by viewers and listeners like you through the membership program. You can sign up in mere seconds at joinpakman.com. You'll get the daily members-only bonus show and the true pleasure of knowing you're supporting alternatives to homogenous corporate media. You can use the coupon code BETTER21 if you so please to get a very large discount on the choice of membership that you prefer at joinpakman.com. We have some very interesting new polling from these early days of the Joe Biden administration, and 69% of Americans approve of Joe Biden's week one COVID response. And if you know anything about the hyper-partisan and politicized divided nature of the United States, 69% of Americans agreeing about anything is pretty remarkable. And there are even better numbers than that. This is an ABC News Ipsos poll released yesterday. 69% of Americans support Joe Biden's COVID-19 response thus far. That's 97% of Democrats, 70% of independents, but very interestingly, almost half of Republicans, 40% of Republicans approve of the way Joe Biden so far has handled coronavirus. Now, in comparison, the highest approval rate that Trump ever had on the pandemic was 55%. But when was it? It was mid-March. What had Trump done in mid-March? I think it was March 12th or 15th that Trump said we're shutting down travel from China or Europe. That was his high point of 55%, and it's only been down from there. Joe Biden already at 69% approval on coronavirus. What has he done so far that people approve of? Well, on day one, he did sign the executive orders he promised to sign, the federal face mask mandate at federal buildings and on transportation, et cetera. He also put together a number of other specific plans which are yet to be voted on in terms of coronavirus stimulus, vaccine distribution, and much, much more. Interestingly, the mask mandate has 81% support across the country, 81% support. And Joe Biden also importantly stopped the American withdrawal from the World Health Organization, immediately putting Dr. Anthony Fauci as the sort of liaison or spokesperson for the U.S. in the rekindled relationship with the WHO. 70% of Americans also agree with getting back into or halting our exit from the WHO. This is a really, really big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is that, again, in this country, it's really hard to get numbers that high on anything. If we've talked before on presidential approval. You have probably 20% of the country who will never abandon the president and 20% of the country that will never approve of the job the president's doing, meaning even though on paper a president's approval could be between 0 and 100, it's really probably between 20 and 80. And when we look at the data over recent times about, do you think Trump really won the election? The people who thought even up until January 20th and maybe still today that somehow Trump is going to get a second term, 30% of this country seems basically cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I know some people won't like that phrase, but what I mean is there is a non-trivial portion of this country, 25, 30% maybe, that includes that 20 that will never abandon Trump, plus another 5 to 10% that thinks they are evaluating the situation and coming to those same conclusions, that is completely disconnected from reality, completely disconnected from empiricism and facts and thinking and rationality. And so when you see, wow, in a country where 25 or 30% of the country is whacked, 81% approval on a mask mandate, that really tells you something. These are numbers that are in practice effectively as close to unanimity as you can expect to get in a country that's as ideologically, call it diverse, as the United States. We also have from this new poll, this ABC News Ipsos poll, the question of, do you believe Joe Biden will unite the country? Now, at the top of the show, I said no. We're not. Regardless of Joe Biden's efforts, I don't believe that we will see a united United States in any true sense. 57% of respondents believe that Joe Biden will make progress in uniting the country. Not a great number, but it's something. And we will continue to track all of this data. We are starting to see cases now, as I predicted months ago. This isn't because of anything Joe Biden did yet. We are starting to see cases come down from their pandemic high around January 10th, and hopefully they will continue on down. Hopefully deaths will turn the corner. Hospitalizations in many areas are already going down. So let's hope that we continue in this direction under Joe Biden. Sadly, Dr. Deborah Birx, now retired, became an unfortunate node of disinformation during her work for the Trump administration on the coronavirus pandemic. And you might remember the clips of Dr. Birx repeating how smart and thoughtful Donald Trump is. She would repeat falsehoods about the reality of the virus. She would make obviously false claims about how well things are going here or there, thanks to Donald Trump. And many of us did not fall for it, although some did. Now Dr. Birx has retired, and she did an interesting interview yesterday with CBS's Face the Nation, and she sort of came clean about the Trump administration's handling of coronavirus. And we're going to look at some clips, not crips. We're going to look at clips. And this is all fine and good. I mean, she's telling us things we all suspected, but it's too damn late. The time to sound the alarm would have been 10 months ago, when clearly she knew Donald Trump was in over his head and this was being mishandled. Coming clean when Trump's gone and you're retired and we have 2, soon to be 3 or even 4 vaccines, it's too late. Now, it's still interesting in a car crash sort of way to hear what she has to say. Asked if Donald Trump was merely distracted from the virus, which is deadly enough, Dr. Birx says there were actually people in the White House who actively thought the coronavirus pandemic was a hoax.
Were there COVID deniers in the White House?
There are people in the White House, and I think people around this country, because I've had the privilege to meet them and listen to them and hear them, because I wanted to hear what people were saying. There were people who definitely believed that this was a hoax.
Why?
I think because the information was confusing at the beginning. I think because we didn't talk about the spectrum of disease, because everyone interpreted on what they knew. And so they saw people get COVID and be fine.
Now, she almost blames herself there. We didn't talk about the spectrum of disease, as if that would have changed the minds of the people telling Trump not to worry about this. These were people committed for political reasons to claiming or believing that it was a hoax. And it's horrifying. She presenting other data was not going to make a difference. And Dr. Birx in this next clip claims that despite the fact that she was the coordinator of the White House COVID task force, she basically never saw Trump in the spring.
Or you gave an interview.
What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread.
And then President Trump tweeted. He blasted you for saying that. Did you ever speak to him after that?
I hadn't seen him for months before that or months after that. But that was
You're the coordinator of the COVID task force.
That was an extraordinary moment because I also got yelled at by the speaker, who I have tremendous, I mean, obviously, women have gone through a lot to get in their positions. I have tremendous respect for women and women leadership.
The Speaker Pelosi said she didn't have confidence in you because you were working for President Trump.
I don't have confidence in anyone who stands there while the president says, swallow Lysol and it's going to cure your virus. You know, it'll kill you and you won't have the virus anymore.
And so that was very hard because I've known her from the HIV world.
So again, the big news, Birx hadn't seen Trump in person for months before that, nor after that. COVID coordinator, not seeing the president of the United States. Trump simply didn't care, which we knew. She's just confirming it. Birx asked, how the hell did Trump get COVID? Arguably the person who could be the most protected. They were supposedly testing everybody every day. And Dr. Birx says nobody at the White House wore a mask. Take a listen to this.
But how did the task force allow the president, who calls himself a germaphobe, to get COVID himself? How did that happen?
There were only 2 people who regularly wore a mask in the White House. Myself and Tyler Ann McGuffrey, the support person that I had from HHS.
So the staff around the president was not wearing a mask. He's the commander-in-chief. This is a national security risk. How is that possible?
I think people believed wrongly that testing would be adequate.
How is that possible?
I think they believe that testing is a surrogate for a public health intervention.
But did you say the president of the United States needs to wear a mask? Did you press Mike Pence on that? Did you press Mark Meadows, his chief of staff?
There are multiple communications about masking.
Yeah. This tells you a lot. And again, we suspected this stuff, but to hear her say it is both, again, too little too late, but stunning to hear that this degree of incompetence surrounded Trump. Here she explains that someone was giving Trump graphs that weren't coming from her. She doesn't know who it was, but somebody was giving Trump other data. And by data, I mean pictures, essentially.
Do you think President Trump appreciated the gravity of the health crisis you were describing?
I think the president appreciated the gravity in March. It took a while after I arrived in the White House to remove all of the ancillary data that was coming in. I mean, there was parallel data streams coming into the White House that were not transparently utilized. And I needed to stop that. Where people
You mean outside advisors?
Outside advisors coming to inside advisors, and to this day, I mean, till the day I left, I'm convinced there were parallel data streams because
Disinformation.
I saw the president presenting graphs that I never made. So I know that someone out there or someone inside was creating a parallel set of data and graphics that were shown to the president. I don't know to this day who.
Parallel data and strange graphs and charts. Not unique to the pandemic within the Trump administration. I think we all remember the Hurricane Sharpie incident and other instances of bogus data and graphs. So all of our suspicions were true. And that's why this happened. Early, Trump didn't take it seriously. After April, he also didn't. And no one at the White House did. That was in his immediate inner circle. The people taking it seriously, like Dr. Birx, to some degree, although she did play a role in perpetuating disinformation, Dr. Fauci, they weren't even talking to Donald Trump for months at a time. And there were people at the White House who believed it was a hoax. This is the full story. And it explains everything that went on perfectly clearly. They disbanded the pandemic response team. They threw out or ignored the pandemic response playbook left behind, color-coded by the Obama administration. They weren't wearing masks at the White House. They weren't talking to Dr. Birx. Trump wasn't. And Birx coming clean now is great for the record, but it didn't help at all back then. Is there a silver lining here? There is. Knowing the degree of disregard that the Trump administration had for the virus and seeing how Joe Biden is actually taking this issue head on from day one suggests to me, as if we didn't know from all of the examples from New Zealand and Rwanda and Taiwan and others, that having a federal administration focused on this will make a really big difference. Like, things got disastrously bad in the U.S., and they got that bad with total incompetence and disregard from the Trump administration. Now that we have people paying attention to it, I am even more confident that it will make a huge difference. Could Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci and someone else maybe have come together in May and publicly denounced everything that was going on? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. And again, the question that I have is, I don't know what happens if they do. If they all get fired and get replaced with total sycophants. Birx kind of became a sycophant by default. Fauci did not, but he was pushed out to a great degree. I don't know. If they all come together and say this has to stop, this is what's going on, they may all get fired and get replaced by the equivalent of Dr. Scott Atlas in all of these positions. But nothing surprising whatsoever in what Dr. Deborah Birx tells us. Would have been nice for her to say it a little bit sooner, for sure. We'll have more coverage of this on our Instagram page. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. And you can find me on Instagram at david.pakman. I posted some interesting things over the weekend that you may find enjoyable or horrifying, depending on your predisposition. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The #1 funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, so we're going to look at some material today from two of these new Republican members of the U.S. House who were elected in November. Today, we're going to be looking at an interview with Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn, and shortly, we're going to look at some tweets from Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. And here's what I really want everyone to get from this. Among, yes, how to identify and defeat really bad arguments, that's important, but there's a bigger story here. These people whose material we're going to look at momentarily, they got elected riding the Trump scam train. They didn't run on policy. They didn't run on being experts in a particular issue or on certain types of subject matter. They ran on merely playing Trumpian characters, riding the wave of support for Trumpism that exists to a greater degree in some parts of the country and in some districts in the United States. And the problem with electing what are essentially characters playing a political acting role is they don't know anything about anything. There's no substance to them whatsoever. Now, in general, in American politics, there's a huge role for personality. You all know this: personality, appearance, public speaking ability, ability to raise money. There's a whole bunch of stuff that in American politics on both sides, it can get people elected who are not the most qualified and doesn't mean they're actually equipped to deal with policy in depth. But this has never been more acutely so than among this latest wave of people who got elected merely for being pro-Trump cultists in areas that have a lot of pro-Trump cultist voters. So let's get right into this. New Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn has been very loudly saying, first of all, that he goes armed to the House of Representatives, but also that there was likely fraud and wrongdoing in states like Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and others because of mail-in voting and other stuff that Trump has also been repeating. You all know the stories. It took 2 months between the election and the inauguration, 2.5 months of them repeating these same bogus, tired stories. And Cawthorn actually voted against accepting certain states' election results in the House of Representatives on January 6th. So Cawthorn goes on CNN and he's interviewed by Pamela Brown, who came very prepared, and is asked about the fact that his arguments for voting not to certify some states apply to the state in which he was elected, North Carolina, as well. But he never claimed that there were problems in his state, even though the guidelines he has a problem with in other states apply just as much to North Carolina. This could not have gone any worse for Madison Cawthorn. He's going to have to stop doing these interviews. But before we get to that part, here's Pamela Brown challenging Madison Cawthorn to cite evidence of election fraud. She says, and I love this, you must have so many specific instances of evidence of fraud, right? And he did not.
What are some specific examples that informed this bold decision, this audacious decision, even after the riots, to decertify the results? You must have seen some concrete evidence.
Well, Pam, the things that I was not objecting to the election on behalf of was things like Dominion voting machines changing ballots, or these U-Haul trucks pulling up filled with ballots for Joe Biden as president. The thing I was objecting for is things like I said, in the state of Wisconsin, particularly in the town of Madison, there was an appointed official in that town who actually went against the will of the state legislature and created ballot drop boxes, which is basically ballot harvesting that was happening in the parks.
But this was all litigated. You know that the Trump campaign litigated all of this, more than 60 cases, and they lost. Either the cases were dismissed, the Trump campaign withdrew, or they never brought a case because they didn't have the evidence to back it up.
Indeed, I believe specifically, and this is the one that I debated on behalf of on the House floor, in Wisconsin, that was never heard because they dismissed it because of standing. Now, I don't believe that that is concrete enough of a way to say
Well, there were 3 Trump appointments. Okay, so you have
dismisses it.
Wisconsin, but you ended up not actually voting against Wisconsin. It was just Arizona and Pennsylvania because you didn't have the Senate votes. But
Okay, so he didn't object because of machines or massive ballot dumps coming out of the back of trucks. Okay, but in Wisconsin, some official created drop boxes. But as Pamela Brown points out, that was all litigated. It had no merit. But the most important is he keeps talking about Wisconsin. He didn't end up voting against certification in Wisconsin. He voted against certification in other states. This is so incoherent, we'd need an hour to tease it all apart, and it gets even worse.
3 Trump-appointed judges actually threw out these cases because of merit. It was because of merit. There were 3 Trump-appointed judges out of all of these judges and the more than 60 cases that were tossed out. And you keep talking about Wisconsin. I'm still not hearing any specific examples of fraud. If you would, just tell us, what are the specific examples you saw of fraud? Because when you think of fraud, you think of a vote, you're slipping one past the election official, or a vote was stolen, somehow it didn't count. Did you see that specifically?
No, Pam, and like I said, that's
So
not
you
the
didn't-
reason I
okay.
contested the election.
So this is already just a disaster for this guy. And then Pamela Brown points out the contradiction between Cawthorn saying he has issues with the changes to election rules in Wisconsin, where his own state where he was elected, North Carolina, made similar changes because of the pandemic. Look at this. If you have an aversion to cringe, walk out of the room right now.
You keep focusing on Wisconsin, but there were several battleground states that you contested to, that you talked about. There were several that President Trump had lost. So it's interesting you're focusing on Wisconsin. But would you apply the same issues you had with these battleground states to your own state of North Carolina? Because North Carolina also changed a lot of the rules, even after voters had started voting. Why didn't you have concerns about your own home state of North Carolina?
Well, you know what, Pam, I'm actually not aware of the laws that were changed inside of North Carolina. I believe we had a very safe and a very secure election here.
Wait, what? North Carolina was fine, safe, secure, even though they did lots of the same things, but North Carolina simply didn't become part of the narrative. And it keeps getting even worse, if you can imagine.
There were
and
several
so
rules.
there's no reason to contest that.
Yeah, there were several rules, one of which is to extend when the mail-in ballots could arrive, I believe, by around 7 days. That was one, and there were a couple of others as well that were changed even after people started voting. So I'm just wondering, if you're so concerned about these rules being changed with the election, why wouldn't you focus on your own home state of North Carolina? I mean, you're telling me that your concern really is about election integrity, not politics, not the results of the election, right?
That is absolutely correct. I didn't do this for any one man or against any one man.
Okay. So North Carolina, though, the same issues you've had and you've expressed about the battleground states, those are the same issues that are in your own state of North Carolina. And North Carolina actually did have mail-in ballot fraud in 2018. So you're not concerned about your home state and whether you were duly elected by your own standards?
Well, I'll tell you, because of the mail-in ballot fraud that happened in the midterms here in 2018, I believe our election integrity standards here in North Carolina are some of the greatest in the country. I think they should apply this metric all over the country, but that's just my opinion.
So he doesn't know anything about it, or at least claims to, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. His election was definitely accurate because he won. So he definitely won fair and square. And then later, in the sort of wrap up to this complete farce of an interview, he admits, yeah, the election wasn't fraudulent. I did what I could do to push back, but it actually was not a fraudulent election. Well, but then Madison, why did you push back?
Can you now say that the election was not stolen, that it wasn't a fraudulent election?
Yes, I think I would say that the election was not fraudulent. The Constitution allowed for us to be able to push back as much as we could, and I did that to the amount of the constitutional limits that I had at my disposal. So now I would say that Joseph R. Biden is our president.
And you have no regrets?
No, I do not have any regrets.
Okay. Listen, Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn, thank you for coming on.
So either he's going to need some serious media training, or he will have to stop doing these interviews. And this is what happens when we elect characters to play lawmakers on TV. It's not about governing. It's the new version of winning a reality TV show. That's all it is. And Pamela Brown so easily dismantles this guy to the point of it being humiliating for him. And you almost start to feel bad for the kid, except that he chose to do this and people voted him in. And now he can wield power and do a lot of damage. So it isn't necessarily a new phenomenon in our political history that incompetent people get elected. That's not new. And we've seen that on both sides. But the way in which the cult of Trump has been weaponized to propel completely clueless people who have no business even being on the House floor. Like, it's not even about what they do. They have no business being on the House floor. Their big concern is bringing guns to the House floor. It is particularly pernicious right now. Now, contrast this. If you want to think about someone who's the opposite of people like Madison Cawthorn and Lauren Boebert, who we'll talk about, think about Jamie Raskin. OK, you don't have to agree with everything Jamie Raskin does. You can say Jamie Raskin's not progressive enough or whatever. Jamie Raskin is a guy who cares about policy and depth and brings a depth of knowledge about the issues. And he can talk about the issue. He is a sort of politician's politician, and he suffered tragic loss recently with the death of one of his children. But he comes to mind as the antithesis to these clueless reality show characters. Let's now talk about Lauren Boebert. We're continuing our tour through truly incompetent new Trumpy members of the House. And Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is at the top of the list, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Madison Cawthorn. And as you may or may not know, Lauren Boebert demands to be armed on the House floor. She recently set off the metal detectors at the House of Representatives. This is a wacky person. She tweeted something which exposed her complete lack of knowledge about the minimum wage and economics. She said, quote, "I got my start working at McDonald's. That job doesn't exist if the minimum wage is raised to $15 per hour. Small business would be crushed by this arbitrary mandate, and big business would simply automate away jobs. Not everything that sounds good is actually good in practice." It is stunning how many bad arguments she was able to squeeze into that one tweet. First of all, she claims jobs at McDonald's don't exist if you raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Minimum wage in Washington, D.C. is $15 per hour. McDonald's exist. Debunked. Number two, she says that it's arbitrary to make the minimum wage $15 an hour. This is an argument we often hear from people who come in and say, listen, if you're just picking a number and more money for people is good, why stop at $15 an hour? Make the minimum wage $100 an hour. Make it $1,000 an hour. And of course, they are wrong that it is arbitrary. $100 or $1,000 an hour minimum wage is not defensible on the basis of cost of living, on the basis of work and productivity generated by employees in typical minimum wage jobs. It's not an equilibrium wage in the market. So they want to say, oh, it's $15. It could be 12. It could be 100. Make it 1,000. Why not? No. There's nothing arbitrary about it. And 15 is probably a hair too low in some places due to cost of living. And in some other places, you could argue there are really low cost of living places where maybe you could argue 15 is too high relative to cost of living and revenue at small businesses. But the idea that it's arbitrary is just completely wrong. And what you have to understand, what is she missing here? And she's missing a lot. Remember that labor is only one input at a place like McDonald's. And we've studied how meaningful wage increases at places like McDonald's would have a very small impact on the total cost, not the price, the cost of a Big Mac. And clueless people have scammed their way into positions of power by attaching themselves to the Trump scam train, and Republican voters fell for it. And now you have people like Lauren Boebert who don't know anything in positions of power. You also have to remember that when you increase the minimum wage, you're creating demand side stimulus, even though it might cost McDonald's a little more to make the Big Mac because of the increased minimum wage. Way more people now have money to go buy more Big Macs. That's the demand side stimulus component. She also mentions they would automate jobs. McDonald's has already been doing that for a very long time, both in areas where there is a $15 minimum wage, a $14 minimum wage, a $13 minimum wage, and a $7 minimum wage. They've already been automating these touchscreen ordering machines, app-based delivery and collection order, all this different stuff. And so, of course, it's a total misunderstanding by Lauren Boebert. I don't think anyone's shocked that she doesn't know a damn thing about economics. But the reality is that we're only going to get more of this if at some point the Republican Party doesn't say this has to stop. Even people like, okay, I would disagree with Mitt Romney on policy, but he has a better understanding of at least what the terms of the debate are and how it should be discussed. We would come to different conclusions. He would have some bad ideas, I'm sure, about supply side economics as an example. But this is just a cartoonish farce, people like Lauren Boebert. And if the Republican Party learned anything from the Trump fiasco, it would be to make sure that in the 2022 election, all of these nuts lose. And I don't know that Republicans have actually learned that. Let me know if you think they have. We'll be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're continuing to get to know this new class of elected officials in the House of Representatives, which includes some really, really unqualified people. We've spoken before about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who drafted articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on January 21st last week. Yes, she did. We talked earlier today about Lauren Boebert. We spoke earlier today about Madison Cawthorn's disastrous interview on CNN. To give you a sense of the sort of folks that we're dealing with here, there is pretty widespread reporting about Madison Cawthorn visiting Hitler's house because it was a bucket list item for him. And everything down to the detail, this is indistinguishable from satire with some of these guys. The Jewish mayor of Asheville, North Carolina, remember that Madison Cawthorn is a representative now in North Carolina, back in August said, it's very concerning that the Republican then candidate, now member of Congress, visited Adolf Hitler's vacation home and referred to him as the Führer on social media. And back in 2017, Cawthorn posted from the so-called Eagle's Nest, Hitler's vacation home. It was one of the last battlegrounds of World War II, referred to Hitler as the Führer, said that going there was on his bucket list, and did call Hitler a supreme evil, right? I'm not looking to hide that from you. The Mayor Mannheimer said it's very concerning. Throughout the last several years since Trump has been elected president, I think all of us have seen that white supremacists are emboldened and are publicly making their positions known. And to elect someone who openly throws out dog whistles like this, it just makes me really sad, actually, first and foremost. It makes me sad, disappointed, worried. Now, when this was written about, Cawthorn briefly took down the pictures because a lot of attention was called to them. Then they were publicly visible again, Cawthorn deciding to double down and to say that it's a fake news controversy, that he wasn't there to celebrate. He was celebrating a victory over evil. So I have a few different thoughts about this. First of all, as someone who is disabled, Madison Cawthorn would have been one of the first killed by the Nazis right after Jews. So that the irony of that is certainly not lost on me. You'll very often hear defenses from these folks like, no, I was interested in seeing how such evil was defeated. Or sometimes you'll hear a little more about, it was interesting for historical reasons. Visiting Hitler's vacation home, I'm an historian, and it was interesting for that. Or reading Mein Kampf is interesting for historical reasons. I enjoy history as well. But when you see people flocking to the Hitler stuff for history's sake, but they're not interested in any other areas of history, it is a little weird, right? Like if Mein Kampf is the only history book you read, you might not be that interested in history, and Mein Kampf isn't even really a history book. It's a historical book for sure, but it's not a book about history. I'm no expert, but very often when people gravitate to Hitler's vacation home or reading Mein Kampf, and like that's the only curiosity they have, it's not really about history. It's that they find the legacy of power and violence and ruthlessness exciting or interesting. And I'm not denying that Madison Cawthorn thinks Hitler was evil in some kind of nominal way. What I am sure of is that Cawthorn is a reactionary and a liar, and we should be very careful about believing anything he says. And I don't know how many of you are aware of the history of lying. Madison Cawthorn misled the public about claiming he was training for the Paralympics. He misrepresented his educational history. He misrepresented his business history. This seems like just a liar, which reminds me of someone, by the way. Multiple outlets have reported that before running for office, Cawthorn said he was training for the 2020 Paralympic Games. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. Cawthorn wasn't on any team or club. He didn't run any races. It'd sort of be like if I said, I'm training for Olympic ski jumping. But have you done any skiing to prepare? No. Do you have a coach? No. Are you on any team? No. Do you have a lift ticket anywhere? No, but I'm training. Like that's the degree to which it seems that he was training. Cawthorn claims to have been a successful business owner and heading to the Naval Academy when his tragic car accident left him paralyzed. But the truth is he had already been rejected from the Naval Academy, so it wasn't true he was heading there. His only business that anyone was able to find was a real estate investment company that had zero income and no employees in 2019. So this seems like a liar. And when you talk about someone that gets elected merely riding the wings or standing on the coattails of Donald Trump and the Trump cult, this is exactly who you would imagine gets elected. And we'll be doing deep dives into Lauren Boebert. We'll be doing deep dives into Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are folks who know nothing about policy or governance. They are the epitome of cultish role players. And we saw that in Madison Cawthorn's Pamela Brown interview earlier on in the show. And so these folks really have to be defeated in 2022. If Republicans learned anything from the Trumpian fiasco, and I don't know that they have, but as I said earlier, if they learned anything from the Trumpian fiasco, they would make sure to run credible primaries against these folks or to convince them to retire and that they can't win. I don't know that that's actually going to happen, but these folks, if they get reelected, would cement this Trumpian cult in the House of Representatives for multiple terms. And that would be really, really scary and an absolutely horrible thing. Hey, listen to this. This is just a pleasure to read. Rudy Giuliani is being sued by Dominion Voting Systems over false election claims. The lawsuit against Rudy Giuliani is because he is accused of carrying out a, quote, viral disinformation campaign. Dominion Voting Systems has filed a defamation lawsuit. The lawsuit was filed this morning, and it's 107 pages long. It accuses not only Giuliani, as I mentioned, of carrying out a viral disinformation campaign about Dominion, it accuses him of putting out there demonstrably false allegations to enrich himself through legal fees and his podcast, and that's true. A big theme on his popular podcast for Rudy Giuliani was making false claims about Dominion voting systems. The suit is suing Rudy for $1.3 billion. Yeah, they're not going to get that, I know. And it makes It files this suit on the basis of 50 different statements that Rudy made at legislative hearings via tweets, as well as on his podcast and while being interviewed on conservative news media. Now, as you know, Rudy Giuliani was supposedly getting 20 grand a day to defend Donald Trump or represent Donald Trump in the election fraud bogus cases. We later learned that Donald Trump directed his team not to pay Rudy Giuliani, and we don't know if or how much of that 20 grand a day Rudy has actually been able to collect. But look at this. Does anybody feel sorry for Rudy? You throw your reputation away to peddle baseless conspiracy theories for Trump, which of course go nowhere. Trump ends up saying don't pay him. And now Rudy is going to accumulate significant legal fees because he's getting sued for the things that he said. Now, he should be sued. He should be disbarred. And in the end, he should be held accountable for his role in the insurrection, which now I don't just mean on the day of the insurrection saying, let's do trial by combat. That's bad enough. But I mean the 2 months that he spent ginning up anger over non-existent voter fraud claims with his hearings and his flatulence at the hearings and everything else. And you can actually make the case that Dominion voting systems has really been irreparably damaged by the false allegations. It is hard to think of a time where I would take the side of a corporation against an individual, but the Dominion voting systems name, any election that Dominion voting systems is involved in, you are going to have people who come out of the woodwork and claim fraud because of Dominion voting systems. These people, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and whoever, they really have destroyed the reputation of Dominion voting systems for no reason whatsoever. So we'll see what happens in these lawsuits. In terms of Rudy, listen, a lot of people continue to say Rudy was just compromised. That's why Rudy did all of these things. He was compromised. We don't yet know the full extent or the details, but he was. If Boebert can get Rudy into the position Rudy found himself in, there's no doubt that professionals would be able to manipulate Rudy Giuliani. There's no question about that. And when you think about it, a lot of the actions from some of these Republicans can be explained by them being compromised. I'm not saying they are, but for example, Lauren Boebert owed or owes money to the IRS. That would often prevent people from getting a security clearance, but politicians are still able to run and get elected regardless. And it puts her in a position of being very easy to have over a barrel if the right people get involved. Rudy throwing away his reputation, had strong favorability as the mayor of New York City after 9/11. And that went away over the following years and then just completely imploding in terms of his reputation during the presidency of Donald Trump. Now, by the way, this should be exciting news for anybody who still believes there was evidence of election fraud, this lawsuit. What do I mean by that? If the lawsuit goes forward, the evidence that Rudy Giuliani and his cronies supposedly have about Dominion voting systems would come out in the discovery phase of the lawsuit. So for those of you, and I know that there are some of you still in my audience who think any day now the evidence will come out, this lawsuit against Rudy is the perfect opportunity to get all of that evidence of voter fraud out during the discovery phase. I'll be waiting. I look forward to seeing if we ever see that information. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's something we heard from Troy York. You know, I'm hearing this from a lot of people, which is basically now that Trump is gone, your show is dead, David. It's dead.
You know, just I bet secretly you had to be rooting for President Trump because I think that you as a podcaster, you are done.
Right.
I mean, if you don't have Trump around, what the hell is the David Pakman show going to talk about? And you're not even getting your international funding anymore. There's no point in
right funding, which I don't have.
Programs like you, David Pakman, and Sam Cedar. You guys are done.
Right.
So I don't know why you celebrate and we're pushing so hard against Trump when, in fact, you're not going to have no content.
Right. You know, what's fascinating about this is that when Obama won and defeated George W. Bush, I got all the same emails. You're now on the inside, and there's not going to be nothing to do. The show quadrupled during Obama, raised venture capital. I mean, it was like crazy. The Obama era was completely crazy for us, but I got worried. Maybe Troy's onto something here. Maybe we're done. So I went and looked, and in the short 5-day period since the inauguration, we had live stream views in the millions. We continued to have 1 or even 2 million views a day on the YouTube channel, even through the weekend when we normally see a dip. We added 11,000 new YouTube subscribers. And one of the biggest growth weeks we've ever had on our Instagram IGTV channel was the last week during and since the inauguration. And, you know, the reality is there are always things going on. Right-wing media is going to be nuts the next 2 years. These Trumpian right-wing elected officials are going to be nuts. And some of our best performing clips of the last 3 months, and during the last 3 months, Trump did a lot of crazy things. Even during the last 3 months have been since the time of Trump's departure. Our coverage of Lauren Boebert and these other insurrectionists, the focus group with Republican voters, one of our top clips, Sean Hannity claiming Biden's doing re-education camps. This has been a thing forever. You're circling the drain now that the winds are changing politically. And then we grow and we grow and we grow. And if the last 5 days are any indication, the next 3 months could be really crazy. But, you know, I'm really glad that through the years, Troy has stuck with us. He seems to love the show because he knows everything that's going on here. We will talk to you more on today's bonus show. Get instant access by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. We will talk about the death of Larry King. We will talk about the candidacy of Sarah Huckabee Sanders for governor of Arkansas, and much, much more. Sign up and get instant access at joinpakman.com. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. SteadyMD lets you maintain a meaningful, long-lasting relationship with a primary care physician who you can meet with anytime over phone or video chat. You don't need insurance. It's only $99 a month with no other fees or copays. Visit steadymd.com/Pakman to get started.